It's time for me to talk about one of my favorite features in InDesign. It's not a particularly flashy feature, but it's incredibly helpful to anyone who needs to write or edit text inside InDesign. And that feature is Story Editor. It's like having a little word processor built right into InDesign. Here, let me show you. I have my Rue article file open from the exercise files folder, and I'm going to jump down to the second spread by pressing Option page down or Alt page down. I want to edit some of the text in here, right inside this frame. But instead of zooming in and trying to find the text, I'm simply going to select the frame itself, go to the Edit menu, and then choose Edit in Story Editor. Or you could press Command-Y on the Mac or Control-Y on Windows. When I do that, up comes a nice neutral window, just like a text editor. I'm not distracted by colors or drop caps or anything like that. It's just a neutral window, and I can make this as wide as I want, and the text just reflows. I will tell you the one thing that I really dislike about Story Editor, and that is the default font that it ships with. Who wants to read that font? It's crazy. I'd rather use a font that I can read easily on screen. And fortunately, you can change that by going to the Story Editor display pane inside the Preferences dialog box, which you can find on the Mac under the InDesign menu and in Windows under the Edit menu. I'll choose Story Editor Display, and then I'll change the font. Right now it's set to letter Gothic. I don't like that, so I'm going to click there and change the font to something that looks good to me. Let's try Georgia. I'll press Tab and change the line spacing from single space to 150% space. That gives a little bit of extra space between each line. I'll also change the font size. I'll change it up to 16 points, something like that. That looks better to me. There are many other things you can change in here as well, like the theme. Right now it's set to ink on paper, but if you want to go crazy, you could choose something else like yellow on black. It's difficult to read for me, but whatever you like. I'm going to set it back to ink on paper, just black text on a white background. The one thing I'm definitely going to change here is the cursor option. I like barbell. You know how sometimes it's hard to see the cursor flashing on screen? Well, barbell takes care of that. You'll see in just a moment. It makes it much easier to see. I'll click OK, and there we go. All of those changes are updated in the Story Editor window. And there's my barbell text cursor flashing away. It's very easy to see no matter where I click. Now, as I said, the Story Editor does not show fonts or size or most other formatting of your text. What it does show is bold and italic. Like down here, this text that's in italic, it shows that. Now, I'm going to move this Story Editor window over to the right so I can see both it and the text behind it. And this text on the page is so small that it's going to be hard to see this, but I'm going to just grab some text from up here. I'll just grab some text here in the Story Editor window and delete it. You'll see a very slight pause, and then as soon as InDesign recognizes that you've paused for a moment, it updates it on the document page behind. Now, I mentioned earlier that you can use Command-Y or Control-Y to open the Story Editor. You can also use the same thing to switch out of Story Editor to go back to the document page. And that turns out to be very useful because I can select some text inside the Story Editor and then go back to the document page by pressing Command-Y or Control-Y, and it swaps back and selects exactly the same text. It always synchronizes the selection. That turns out to be a really useful thing. And you'll see this the more you're using Story Editor. Once again, I'll select some text down here and then press Command-Y or Control-Y. Up comes the Story Editor, and the same thing is selected. Story Editor is great whenever you need to edit really tiny text or text on a path or maybe text that's in a text frame so wide that it's hard to see all the text at the same time. But one of the best uses for Story Editor is when you have so much text that it can't fit inside the frame. In this text frame, the story is overset, but I can see it in the Story Editor. Story Editor knows no bounds. If I just scroll down in the Story Editor window here, I can see that the text that's overset shows up here in this window. All this stuff that has red next to it, that's the overset stuff. It doesn't fit inside the text frame, but I can still edit it, copy it, paste it, delete it, whatever I need to do. I can work with it inside the Story Editor. Now, since I'm talking about an editorial type feature like Story Editor, I should also mention the Info panel. I love the Info panel. I'm going to go to the Window menu and choose Info. And up comes the Info panel. Move this off to the side a little bit. To me, the most interesting part of the Info panel is the bottom down here, where it shows how much text I have selected. For example, if I select this sentence up here, the Info panel immediately shows me that 66 characters and 11 words are selected. If I deselect the text so that the text cursor is just flashing inside the story, it updates to show me all the text in the story. That is, the info panel shows me that there's 199 words plus 1,233 words. What's that plus sign? Well, that's how much text is overset. So you know exactly what you're dealing with. 199 words inside the frame and over 1,200 words overset. If you do a lot of editorial work, you know that this kind of word count is really useful. Ultimately, whether you're editing really tiny 4-point text at the bottom of a legal contract or text on a path or a long story, the story editor makes life so much easier.